I often speak about Zen practice being a practice of transformation. It's one way of understanding it. Practice can really change us or encourage us to allow change. Another way of understanding how practice affects us is that it continuously calls us home, asks us to return to what is simple, asks us to return to the origin. I had a hard time with transformation in practice in my 20s, after I'd been practicing for a few years. I'm going to sort of get into a bit of personal space, so I hope you can sort of bear with me, because I think it might help. My feeling is that when we're young children, that we are much closer to a unitive consciousness. We're much closer to feeling connected with our environment, with our families, with the relationships that we're in. We're much closer to feeling at one with the world that we live in, the experience that we're having. When we start to get into our tens and teens, this is when the I am self begins to manifest. This is when we begin to think about who it is we want to be, what kind of a person we want to be, what are the things that we like and we don't like, what's the kind of music that we like, we don't like, who are the kind of people that we want to hang around with. And as we become mature, as we continue to grow into our adulthood, and I think with the help of practice, our practice is to integrate these two sides. The sides that I often talk about as plus and minus, birth and death. The side that arises becomes distinct, and the side that dissolves unifies. So when I was a kid, I was very connected, I would say. Very much. I spent a lot of time in nature, hanging out at a creek near my house. I was the youngest child in my family, the only son. So I was a bit of a mama's boy. So I was pretty connected with my family, with the world. When I was 9 years old, my mother had a stroke and passed away. And my world was kind of rocked. I was very sensitive as a child, kind of emotionally volatile. I felt things very deeply. And when my mother died, I was hurt really, really deeply. There was no one to point a finger to. No one had done anything to her. Of course, I was... there was nobody to blame. This is the way of things. That which is of the nature to be born is of the nature to die. I can say that now, but then it felt like a great wrong had been done. So my self manifested in accordance with that perception, with that perspective of the world. When I went into high school, I started, but long before then, my music of choice was thrash metal. Metallica, Slayer. These were my favorite bands. I used to dress all in black. I had gigantic motorcycle boots with big metal plates on the front of them. My hair was down to my chest. I had curly locks. They were lovely. But I dyed it this wonderful color called natural blue-black. My nickname around high school was Big and Scary. And my group of friends, known as the Rosebank Boys, our greeting was "Hail Satan." So, but looking back, I can say that this was a wonderful way of protecting myself. The hurt that I had felt hadn't gone anywhere, but I was protecting myself, literally wearing armor. The clothes that I wore, the way that I looked, it was all armor. To protect people from seeing, to protect people from being able to touch, to hurt, or to know the child that had been hurt, that was still within. My friends and I got into a lot of trouble. Fortunately, I managed to evade any kind of convictions and any serious consequences. Not all of my friends were so lucky. And in my later teens, I came into finding out about practice, Zen practice. And I started to get into meditation. Meditation has this funny sort of two-pronged pressure that it applies. The first is that it externally, the mind and body become more settled. The things that we use to distract ourselves with become quieter, so that we are more and more able to hear what's going on within our hearts, within our minds, within our bodies. Simultaneously, I feel that it amplifies or it energizes what is at the very bottom. It activates this energy that is at our very source and calls to us, calls us home. So Zen practice kind of works from both ends at the same time. As we live, the things that we do, the habits that we create, the relationships that we make, they're structures, they're habits, and they have energy. And so as I began to practice, things became more and more clear to me. I became more and more aware of the pain and anger, the upset and grief that led me to numb it with alcohol and with drugs and with sex and with violence. I could recognize it, but it didn't mean that I could just drop those activities. For many years, my practice was this tug of war between the calling of my original home, this thing deep in my guts that was pointing me in the clear direction, and momentum that I had created and generated with my habits, with my circle of friends, with my lifestyle. So practice for me at the beginning was always this kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 3 steps forward, 4 steps back. You know, there was nothing like, after having a great experience of meditation, than going on a complete weekend-long binge. I deserve it, right? But after a while, that clarity, the external clarity that descends upon you in practice, strengthens. And from within, this light, for me, this light of honesty began to shine in the things that I was doing. And while at first I had sort of 2 sides, a practice side where I could do things in a very clear, mindful, present way, I had this other side where I could completely deceive myself. I could just shut that light out and just do what I wanted to do. But as I continued to practice, those two sides merged, and I found that the light didn't go out anymore. It didn't mean that my behavior changed. What it meant was that I could be clear that the activities that I engaged in were not helpful. I was still doing them. And the entire time that I was doing them, I could say to myself, this is not good. I don't feel like I'm in control. I can't actually even stop doing this, even though I know this is causing me suffering. This is causing suffering for those people around me. The Buddha taught that in order for change to take place, we have to reach this point of what was translated as revulsion. And that's what happens. The light doesn't go out, and we watch ourselves being led around by our desires and by our habit energies, and we witness ourselves doing things that we know harm ourselves, cause suffering for ourselves and for others. The light doesn't go out. It gets harder and harder, uglier and uglier, until we say, enough! I can't do this anymore. And that's the point that we have to get to. That's the point that we have to find in practice in order to change. Because we've rutted ourselves, we've created these habits so deeply. It worked at first. And as soon as something works, we continue to do that. What lies outside of the ruts is the vast unknown. And that's terrifying. If we're going to change as human beings, if we're going to expand and realize our nature, we have to be willing to step out into the vast unknown. And the vast unknown is scary. The vast unknown is beyond imagining in immensity, in capacity, in potential. This is why we keep doing the same things over and over again. And it's not until we fully see, it's not until we are completely repulsed by our own ignorance that we're willing to step out. And this is how it happens the first time, the second time. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to handle this. I don't know how I'm going to engage in this or make this relationship, but I know I can't do it that way. And so we begin to try new things. And this is very difficult because the way that we have done it isn't just the way that we've done it. It is us. It is me. I've grown up through my teenage years saying, I like this kind of music. I like to go to parties and do this. I like to hang out with this kind of people. If I'm looking for a relationship with a woman, she is going to look like this. All of these choices, preferences, I build into this me. So that when I find any of those choices causing me suffering, to let them go is to literally let go of myself. It is to die. As we practice, little bit by little bit, we investigate all of these little aspects. Last week I was talking about Dogen's formula. To study Zen is to study the self. And this is what we do. To study the self is to forget the self. Each of these aspects of who it is that we think we are, one by one, we must let go of. We must allow them to drop away. That little idea of what it is that you think you are is tiny. As a human being, as a Buddha, your capacity is beyond imagination. Why would you hold on to such a tiny box? It's only out of fear. Little bit by little bit, as I continued to practice, these edges began to drop away. Fortunately, I became a monk, so I got to keep dressing in black anyway. But the hair came off, and the jewelry came off, and the big boots came off. And what I found was that I wasn't less of a person. I wasn't less of a me. Along the way, I found that young man, that young boy. And I felt the hurt. And I felt the anger. And I felt the grief and sadness and loss. And I wasn't diminished by it. Practice for me isn't a matter of attainment. It's not about gaining wisdom or accomplishing some superhuman feat. This practice is simply returning home, coming full circle, experiencing what it is to be completely unified with this vast cosmos, experiencing what it is to stand clear and distinct, to face it, to see it, all of the diversity, all of the uniqueness, all of the differentiation, and to be able to move smoothly and freely between these two positions, plus and minus. I think many people in this room, in their practice, are going through this. Change is not something which is comfortable, but it's simply a matter of allowing ourselves to come home. Letting go of whatever it is that we are fixated on, like a dog on a bone. To just open our mouths, open our hands, open our hearts, to let go and to be received in our true home.